Trump administration continues its struggles with politicians in robes at the federal district court level, and in some cases the appellate level. Even though the Supreme Court has interceded in a couple of instances, particularly like, for example, sending the message that these nationwide injunctions that federal district court judges have been imposing beyond their authority, generally speaking. But that's not stopping them from trying, the politicians in robes I'm talking about. For example, federal district court enjoining the Trump administration's repatriation of migrant children with their parents in their home country. George Washington law professor Jonathan Turley weighing in on that.
Well, it does seem to run against the grain. The Supreme Court has really put a shot across the bow now of multiple district courts and said you should not do these national injunctions unless you can establish a national class action. And even then, some justices have said we're going to scrutinize that closely. And this seems to be bucking that order. The problem with this is that ultimately I can't imagine the injunction can stand with regard to virtually all of these individuals, these children. They are being reunited with their parents. Many of these children were sent over the border unaccompanied, and they are being sent back, and the parents have been contacted. So it's on pretty darn thin ice for the district court. Now, there can be a delay, and there can be a requirement of some due process, but this is not what you would consider an ordinary deportation case. I mean, you have minors who ideally belong with their parents.
Mm-hmm. But a federal district court is attempting to interfere anyway. Federal appeals court, Trump must allow X as a gender marker on passports. Appellate court, I guess, overturning a motion to dismiss that was granted, arguing that the plaintiffs were likely to succeed on their claim that the department's implementation of its passport policy was arbitrary and capricious. Nothing like characterizing something as arbitrary and capricious by acting arbitrarily and capriciously. For more on where this all stands across the range of issues being litigated, pleased to be joined by Josh Blackman. He holds the Centennial Chair of Constitutional Law at the South Texas College of Law in Houston, and is a contributing editor to Civitas Outlook. He has written about this recently. Josh, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So, I think it's hard to keep track of all of these cases and across all of these policies, but, it's sort of the net of it. What is your handle on whether or not the Trump administration is largely able to implement the policies it's pursued and that have been litigated, particularly in the areas of immigration law and border enforcement, but not limited to those areas?
Well, what's remarkable is that in only about 7 months, we've seen more rulings against President Trump than virtually the entirety of the Biden administration, the entirety of the Obama administration, the entirety of the Trump administration first term. Lower court judges, mostly on the East and West Coast, usually in Boston or Maryland or maybe San Francisco, have been blocking virtually every action Trump has taken. And they're blocking Trump even when the Supreme Court has signaled to stop it. And they're doing some of the things the Supreme Court said not to do. So it's really a remarkable turn of events.
Well, right. But, you make a statement like that, and some people on the left will say, well, yeah, that's because he's doing things that are outside of his power. He's doing things that are unconstitutional. Is that why?
Well, again, a lot of these issues are not clear, right? You might think, it's simple what the Constitution means. These are issues that have been tested before, and Trump always pushes its boundaries. But I think the clearest indication is where the Supreme Court says to lower courts, here's how to do things, and lower courts aren't quite getting the memo. That suggests that even though Trump is trying his best to comply with the law, comply with the courts, lower courts are not doing much the same.
Right. I mean, that's the thing. For all of this loose talk about Trump being an authoritarian and he's doing things that are unconstitutional or extra constitutional, you always find him or the administration represented in court. They are litigating all of these cases simultaneously, of course, the Department of Justice and so forth. But I mean, he's always in court pursuing a judicial remedy or a favorable decision.
That's right. I think there was this fear that Trump would just start ignoring the courts. And the fact of the matter is, Trump has said, I will follow what the Supreme Court says. And he and his lawyers are in court every single day trying to fight off this onslaught. What we're seeing instead is that these judges sort of see themselves as the last line of defense between the United States and anarchy and authoritarianism. And they are issuing just a series of sweeping rulings. They're finding what's called jurisdiction, or the power to rule even when they're not supposed to. And they're really intruding on the executive's constitutional authority, especially in the context of immigration and removal. These are areas where the president does have some power, and the courts are stripping him at every step.
And on the spending side, too, they're trying to, many of these judges have attempted to prevent Trump from clawing back funds, prevent Trump from making funding of federal support for some universities, for example, contingent on specific performance, like compliance with Title IX. Some federal judges have intervened, at least to try to slow down that process, even if they know they can't stop it. And if you're slowing down something as a federal district court judge, knowing you can't stop it, then that is not really, exemplary judicial behavior, is it?
Right. What's unique about the spending cases is that there's a special court in Washington, D.C. called the Court of Federal Claims. And it's long been the rule that when you have a contest with the federal government, they're cutting your funding, you go to this special court. But they're not suing in the Court of Federal Claims. They're suing these federal judges in Boston and in San Francisco and Maryland, who are issuing rulings they're not supposed to. And the Supreme Court said, don't go to Boston, go to the special court in Washington. And these local court judges are finding ways to get around it, to distinguish it. And maybe they're acting in good faith, but some of these rulings are starting to really be questionable. Why don't they just let the case proceed in the correct court? Why are they trying to hold on to it themselves?
Well, this obviously is not going unbeknownst to the Supreme Court. And you, in your piece, you mentioned some of the statements that, for example, Justice Gorsuch has made in no uncertain terms. Lower court judges may sometimes disagree with the court's decisions, but they are never free to defy them. So I assume that at least a majority of the justices, I should say, that are watching these federal district court judges do some of the things they're doing are poised to support more interventions here to get compliance.
Well, the problem is the Supreme Court can't fix them all. There's this old adage where there was a famous judge who was in California that used to say, the Supreme Court can't catch everything I do.
Right.
There's 9 of them and there's hundreds of us, so they can't catch everything. And I almost wonder if some of these judges are trying to use the let's see what we can get away with approach.
Mm-hmm. But I mean, but Trump is winning on a lot of these issues, including some of the spending issues. For example, the with Lee Zeldin over at EPA wanting to claw back $20 billion in taxpayer money that was green lighted in the 11th hour of the Biden administration. I mean, those sorts of things. The compliance he's getting in litigation with universities, not named Harvard, not yet, but some of the other Ivy League schools, for example. I mean, you are seeing him win some of these process battles.
I think at this point he has more losses than wins. Ask me again maybe in 6 months when all these cases are worked with the Supreme Court. I think his win-loss rate will be much better.
Yeah.
But the fact is, a lot of these lower court judges issue their rulings, and they can be appealed for almost a month, 2 months, 3 months. So it takes time to get these things up to the Supreme Court. The blue Democratic attorney generals, they know what they're doing. They're suing in the favorable courts, and they're getting very good rulings. And so it takes some time for everything to resolve. But I think in that 6 months, maybe a year from now, things will look a little bit different.
Obviously, a big case that is making its way to the Supreme Court is with respect to the president's tariff authority.
Yes.
What is your handicapping of how that case will turn out at the High Court?
Yeah, this is the big one. And just to be very clear, if the Supreme Court were to rule that Trump can't issue these tariffs, that would basically shred every single trade deal that Trump has worked out with these various nations. And we've already collected, I think, in the order of hundreds of billions of dollars in these tariffs. That money would have to be returned to sender. and it's not clear that money can be returned. So this is one of these weird cases where the Supreme Court very well could cause a significant economic consequence if they rule against Trump. This was passed down one of the lower courts. It split 7-4. There were 11 members on the court who were active. And, I think this issue is closer than I thought it was at one point. I thought at one point that, of course, Trump can't do this, but I think it's actually kind of a little bit closer. And I tend to think this might be a case where the court sort of says, well, maybe Trump can't do everything. Maybe he can do some of these things, but if we roll against him across the board, it could trigger a global economic collapse, and maybe we don't want to do that. It's not a pleasant thing to say, but there have been cases like this before, like President Roosevelt and others.
Right. I mean, but I mean, in terms of so tease this out a little bit more. In terms of the theory under which President Trump is acting to impose tariffs, to negotiate these trade deals, or at least frameworks for deals, the theory of the basically federal statutory authority that gives the president to act in economic crises, and so then it gets into the definition. So, I mean, how do they split the baby on that? Do they say some of these deals do constitute an economic crisis and others do not?
Yeah, I mean, Trump used a number of different types of authorities in different circumstances for these tariffs. So maybe the court holds that, some of these you can do, some of these you can't do, and then maybe he just finds a way to do the ones he can't do a different way. I mean, look, there have been a lot of laws passed in the last half century that give the president very broad economic powers. And just use an example. There's one law that was passed during the Carter administration, and then President Reagan used this during the Iran hostage crisis to impose all these various sanctions and penalties on Iran. A property that was in the United States owned by the Iranian government was seized. So, I mean, there's a lot of really sweeping authorities that really just haven't been used before. Trump, as usual, he pushes boundaries. He does things that haven't been done before. That doesn't necessarily mean they can't be done. Sometimes it's a good indication, but maybe not.
The implications just on a go forward basis for the precedents that are being set in terms of how these federal district courts on the coasts are behaving when they're flouting Supreme Court directives and so forth. I mean, we talked a lot about lawfare in the run up to last year's election, and now the implications of that, the boomerang effect, if you will. Do you see this approach by these district courts on the coast as also leading us down a dangerous path where you're going to have, a desire for rolling vengeance, and it's just going to go back and forth like some of the prosecutions?
Yeah, I think you draw an analogy. I mean, one of Trump's greatest gifts is causing other people to overreact. And so Trump causes people to overreact, and then Trump responds to overreacting against them. There was this massive lawfare campaign against Trump for all these years, and now he's going after the people in Georgia, going after these people in New York, after the people in the Jack Smith case, to say, okay, you go after me, I'll go after you. Mm-hmm. And it's not crazy to think that these district court judges keep acting out of line. That Trump starts saying, you know what? You keep saying we ignore the courts. Maybe I should. Maybe you're not worthy to be followed. It's not set in stone that everything works the way it works, right? There's a certain trust and balance. And I think for better or worse, the Supreme Court's trying to keep the lower courts in line. But some of these lower court judges, I think that's TDS, Trump Duranian syndrome. I do think it's a real thing. And they sort of just lose their minds of how to behave. Otherwise, sober judges that in other regards are very, careful. They go off the rails.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we see that a lot within a certain subset of the population. Thankfully, it's relatively small, but still problematic. Josh Blackman holds the Centennial Chair of Constitutional Law at South Texas College of Law in Houston. Also, contributing editor to Civitas Outlook. Josh Blackman, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
And he joined us on the Turnkey.pro intro line.
There's only one radio show in Chicago talking about today's biggest stories and telling you what they really mean. That show is this one, Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560, The Answer.
If you're looking to purchase a home after a divorce, you need to call Team Hochberg, your trusted local